All right, good morning. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 21.
Yeah.
So thank you for praying for Charity. You know, she's a little nervous, but that's okay. That's normal. Because she's getting ready to have, you know, major surgery. They're going to be taking a chunk of her kidney out. Right. So, you know, and then, you know, if she's got an infection, and then you know, take part of her kidney out, has to heal with that, and the kidney filters your blood, she's going to be even more susceptible to being able to fight anything off. So because, I mean, now she has to have this surgery right in the middle of this whole COVID thing, and she has to have this surgery. She can't just put it off. It's not something you want to put off. But she's been, you know, thinking she's got that same throat thing that Joy has, you know, and they could cancel her surgery, so she's not sure. So she's a little up in arms right now, you know, because it's now you've got an issue that's anxiety-inducing to begin with, and then now you got this maybe possible throat thing. She could go in there tomorrow and they could just tell her, no, we're not doing it because of your sore throat or whatever, and then you'd have to put it off, and she'd have to delay it and wait longer, or they could do the surgery, but if it's something that's got issues in her body already because of the infection in her throat, then how's that going to turn out? Is that going to make it worse? Is it going to get out of control? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea. So pray for Charity.
Amen.
All right, so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 21, and David and Jonathan just departed from one another. Jonathan warned David to flee because Saul is after David. Jonathan just finally found out, even though he kind of knew it was true, but he found out for sure his dad's intentions. So David's plan was hatched pretty well there for Jonathan to find out firsthand. Jonathan sends David away. They depart from one another, and that brings us to chapter 21 and verse number 1. So we'll just read like the first 7 verses, because I don't know how far we're going to get. We should be able to get through the whole chapter, but I've said that before, and we get 2 verses, so we'll see how far we actually get. So 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse number 1, Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth women have been kept from us about these 3 days, since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, and put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to break open your book. We pray that the lessons that are to be found here are drawn out of it. Okay, so David and Jonathan split up here. David runs, and it says, Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Okay, so I got the map back up because now we're about to get back into the travels of David as he's on the run. So I felt we really need to get the map back up now because he's going to be doing some moving around, and I think it'll help you to understand, you know, what's going on when you kind of know where he ran to, and I don't know. It always helps me to kind of know. When I'm reading a story, you know, I like to know where the scenery is, and you know, where did he actually go? Because did he just go like a mile to the east or 3 days journey to the west? You know, I mean, it's just a name, so you have to kind of know where these places are. So you see Nob up at the top. You see Jebus below that. Jebus is like the Philistine name for the area that eventually becomes Jerusalem. And you see Bethlehem right below that, so you know Bethlehem and Jerusalem are right next door to one another. So that's what we're looking at. That's that area, right? And Nob is just right near there, right near Mizpah. You see Nob. Well, apparently, remember, if we go back far enough in the book, Eli and the tabernacle were in Shiloh, which is further north. And then that all got taken away when they battled with the Philistines, and the sin of his sons and the sin of Eli himself of allowing it, and the ark was taken to the battle, and then the Philistines got the ark, and then they got rid of it because it cursed them, and then they brought it back, and it was in Kirjath Jearim, which you see right near Nob. Well, later on in this book, or in 2 Samuel, you're going to find David bringing the ark back to Jerusalem after all this stuff with Saul is over with. And the ark is still in Kirjath Jearim, but it appears that the tabernacle is in Nob, because that's where the priests are and the showbread. So now it doesn't say that, but there's it says the showbread was there. Well, the showbread was put on the table right there in the holy place and inside the tabernacle. So I don't think it's too hard to speculate with a high degree of probability that this is where the tabernacle is now, because this is where the priests are, and they're at Nob. So they've moved the tabernacle south. Now, why they didn't bring the ark over there, that doesn't say. So I don't know why they didn't bother to bring the ark into the tabernacle where it belongs, but they didn't, because David had to fetch it later on at Jerusalem, and they brought it in. And we'll get into those details when we get to that place. But I wanted to kind of get you oriented to the map here again, because it's been a while since we've had it up. So he goes to Nob, and he goes to Ahimelech, the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? So Ahimelech was kind of afraid, because he kind of, I don't know, it doesn't say why he's afraid. Maybe it's kind of known that he's on the run from Saul. So he knows he's kind of got a fugitive here on his hands. He knows David. Now, I find it interesting because he says, Why are you alone? But yet there's young men with him. He's not really alone, but he's alone. That's what it says. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine in this type of world, when you have sort of like your military class and then your servant class. So when someone of the upper class shows up, they can be surrounded by 30 servants, but they're alone, because where's your other, you usually have other military guys with you. If you're on official business, there's an ambassador, there's a, whatever titles you want to throw in your mind to kind of understand what I'm saying. But usually a guy doesn't just show up like that alone on the king's business with just servants, and that, so it's not a contradiction when it says he's alone. That's why I'm bringing this out, because he's not really alone, but he's alone in official capacity, I suppose. And then if you look at some of the Psalms, and I'm not going to take you there at the moment, but if you look at the Psalms, well, which Psalm? I think it's 42. Look at Psalm 42. We'll look at that one. There's several Psalms that we could reference as we go through here, because, again, like I mentioned a couple weeks ago or last week or whatever, it's important that you really pay attention as we're going through these events of David's life, because these are the things that he writes about in Psalms. So there's a lot of people read the Psalms, but they don't know 1 Samuel. They don't know 2 Samuel. They don't, or the Chronicles. They don't really understand, what was going on in David's life to elicit these songs, these psalms in his life. And Psalm 42 is kind of lets us know that David appeared with a multitude often at before the Lord. So, for example, like verse number 1, we'll just start at verse number 1. As the hart panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, Where is thy God? When I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me. For I have gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God, with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. And then he goes on and continues on writing the song. But you can see that this might be why Ahimelech is saying, why are you alone? Because David would come religiously to the tabernacle to present himself before the Lord on various occasions with a multitude. And so this time he's saying, why are you alone? Something's different. Why are you here? I don't think you're here to worship this time. What's going on, right? So he's kind of suspicious of what's happening here, because this isn't the usual way David comes and presents himself. In verse number 2, and David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business. Now he starts to lie to the priest. Now we've told you several times before, the last few weeks, on how there is a time to lie. When people have evil intentions for you, and it's not for justice, it's not for right, it's not for truth, it's just an evil person with evil intentions trying to hurt an innocent person. There's nothing wrong with lying to protect people. As a matter of fact, that may be your only recourse, and Michael had to do that, David had to do that. Well, now here's an example of David lying to someone who has no evil intentions for him. Ahimelech's got no evil intention for David. That changes the whole... You see what I'm saying? Sure. So this is not the time to lie. Because Ahimelech is your friend. Ahimelech is the priest. Ahimelech has never done you wrong. Ahimelech doesn't have any evil intentions for David. So there's really no need for him to lie here. But somehow he feels that this is another one of those times. Well, this is going to come back to bite him. And Ahimelech, for that matter. And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, okay, so he basically says, I'm on a secret mission, right? I can't tell you why I'm here alone. It's a secret mission. Well, none of that's true. So Ahimelech, he believes David, right? So David says, and then verse number 3, David says, now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. So he knows there's bread in the tabernacle, right? Because the showbread's always there. And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. So he's like, I don't have just regular loaves of bread, but I've got the showbread. I've got this hallowed bread here. But, not just anybody's supposed to be eating this. This is supposed to be for the priests. Are these clean people with you, or are they unclean? What's going on here? In verse 5, and David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. They're clean. And the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. And so David's reminding him, look, this isn't like, it's the showbread, but it's not the showbread. And you'll see that in the next verse. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. So without me taking you back to Leviticus or whatever, they didn't just keep the same bread there forever and let it get all moldy and destroyed, and they would replace it. So David's asking for the older bread, because it's already been replaced with hot bread. I want that bread. I'm not asking for the dedicated bread that's there for this week. You've got to have the old bread, right? I mean, he's fishing here. He's hungry. And you could see there that it was taken from its place for the hot bread, right? So this is not the actual showbread that is dedicated to the Lord for that week. This is the bread that the priests would then have replaced, and then it was for the priests to eat. And now Jesus mentions this in a couple places, in Matthew and also in Mark. The Pharisees start ripping Jesus for helping people on the Sabbath day. He's like, haven't you read about David? He went, and he ate of the bread, what he wasn't supposed to do. We can look at least one of those places. Look at Matthew chapter 12, which preacher will get to here shortly. He's in chapter 5 right now, but we know he's going to get to 12 at some point. So you're going to see this again soon. And so in Matthew chapter 12, this is an account of that. And verse number 3. We'll start at verse number 1. And at the time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were and hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. And then he goes on to explain how the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So I'll let that lesson be taught when we get there, because I can go down a rabbit trail on that. But Jesus references this to show the Pharisees that there are exceptions, guys. Right. There are exceptions, and when people are in need, you help people when they're in need. Right. You know, you can't say, sorry, I can't help you, man, it's the Sabbath day, I can't do anything. That's the wrong heart attitude. Now you've put your religion over your faith, you're supposed to do something to help people, right? And so Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath on top of it, and he was greater than the temple. He gets into all that there in Matthew and Mark, and so we'll leave those comments for that portion of Scripture when we get to it. But I wanted you to see how that this account is referenced later on. So again, remember this account, because it's going to be beneficial for you when we get to those portions in Matthew and Mark and so forth. And so he was given the showbread there in verse number 6. And then verse number 7, now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. And his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So you've got this guy there who's really a servant of Saul, and I guess he was detained there. Saul sent him there to do something. I'm not quite sure what he was sent there to do, but he was there. That's the point. He was there. So there's prying ears around, prying ears and eyes. He's the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And then verse number 8, and David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. So again, he's lying again. He's telling him something again. He's appealing to this bogus story that he's on a secret mission, and it was such a hurried mission that I don't even have any weapons on me. Do you have any weapons? And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that, give it me. Now, it's important you remember this as well. Okay, so obviously the simple part of this is that, yes, the Goliath's sword is there, so he gives him Goliath's sword. But there's no other weapons. Right. The priests are unarmed. They have nothing. And that's going to come into play here pretty soon. And there's a lesson in that. Be armed. Not unarmed. Because it might cost you your life. Right. To be unarmed. It's not very wise to be unarmed. And that's going to come back to bite these priests. And it's not their fault, but you're going to see that come to fruition here pretty soon. So he takes Goliath's sword. In verse number 10, and David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul. So here we go with fear again. So fear is now kind of like playing a role in David's actions, and fear has got him now lying at the wrong time, and fear will do that. Fear will get you to do things wrong. And went to Ickes, the king of Gath. Verse number 11, and the servants of Ickes said unto him, wait, I need to back up there, because he went to Ickes, the king of Gath. So he runs to Gath. Well, who came from Gath? Goliath. That's Goliath's hometown. He ran to the Philistines. He's trying to get away from Saul, and he runs to the enemy. He runs right into Gath with Goliath's sword. Go ahead, John.
Hey, you know where Gath is, like on the map?
Yeah, it's right here. Right there. So it's to the west. And it's actually still there today. Called in Gaza. The Gaza Strip. Gath is in there. And so he's got Goliath's sword in Goliath's hometown, and he runs there to this king. Now, why? It doesn't say why. I don't think it's hard to imagine there must be a reason that David went here, because it says, if you look at it, he went to Ickes. He didn't get caught by Ickes. He went to him. There was he intended to go to Ickes. So it makes me wonder if there's like some sort of history between these guys. Now they've battled each other. So does David think maybe he's won some respect from Ickes through their battles? I mean, you see that even like, you can appeal to a lot of the British wars. You see like competing generals, even our own Civil War, you see competing generals having respect for one another, and they're friendly toward one another, yet their soldiers are killing one another every other day. You know what I'm saying? So is this one of those things? I don't know. I can't say that with certainty. It doesn't say that. But what it does say tells me that David had the intent to go to Ickes. Now, why would he do that if he didn't think he had at least a sliver's chance, of getting some sort of aid from this guy? Now, we don't know. Maybe Ickes had beef with Goliath. Maybe Ickes and Goliath didn't get along, and Goliath ran roughshod over Ickes and what Ickes wanted. Maybe Goliath was renegade in the whole battle with the Israelites. Maybe that wasn't what Ickes wanted Goliath to do, but Goliath has put the servitude of the entire people of the palace, or the Philistines, on the line with his boasting there in the middle of the valley, and he got his entire army putting all their eggs in Goliath's basket, and they got their butts whooped after David took care of Goliath. And maybe, I don't know. I'm totally speculating here. I have no idea. I can't teach that as true. All I can teach as true is that David intended to run to Ickes for some reason, for some good reason. He wasn't suicidal, so he must have thought he had a chance or something with Ickes. And that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So maybe he's thinking, if Ickes understands that I'm Saul's enemy now, maybe I can become maybe Ickes will see that I can become his ally to help defeat his enemy. Although David's intention is not to hurt Saul anyway, but maybe he thinks that Ickes would think that. I don't know. I mean, this is all speculation on my part, but I'm not speculating that David intended to go to Ickes, because that's what it says. He intended to go to Ickes for fear of Saul, and went to Ickes, the king of Gath. So he went there on purpose. We just don't know what he was thinking or what the background is. We kind of have to fill in the blanks. And then you see this all throughout history. If you know anything about like Roger Williams, because when I saw this, I started trying to think of some historical examples of people fleeing from their own countrymen who had evil intentions for them, and running to the enemy and getting safe harbor or safe sanctuary or whatever. Roger Williams ran into the wilderness away from Rhode Island there, and found, or from the Massachusetts Bay Colony or whatever it was, and he ran into the wilderness and found refuge with the natives. And he led some of them to the Lord when he did that, but he had refuge. He went to the enemies and he found refuge. Look at the Jews in World War II. Before World War II, there were some Jews that were turning in other Jews because they had preferential treatment from the Germans.
Right.
And the same with the Tories in the Revolutionary War. You had Tories that would betray, American colonists to the British. They would betray them. So sometimes when your own government is your enemy, you might find some allies with the enemy of your rogue government. And there could be some role like that in our life. I mean, look at like Anne Frank and Corrie ten Boom and things like that, and Jews being held by Germans and protected by Germans, and the Germans were their enemies, but some Germans protected them. Yeah. You got the Underground Railroad in the United States. You had the slaves fleeing. Right. And you had Americans giving them safe harbor from other Americans, right? So this isn't that unusual. You can sometimes find help from saved people from lost people. Right. I mean, sometimes you can get up on the soapbox too high and say, "Oh, the world's evil and wicked," and it is. The world is wicked, generally speaking. That doesn't mean every single person is your enemy, because they're the world and they're lost. You can find some allies and lost people because you might be persecuted by your own brethren.
Right.
So it's important to understand how delicate and complex life is and how situational things are and how wisdom has to act differently depending on situations and things like that. And so it's too easy just to draw a line and say there's us and them. It's not always like that. It's not. Because the us might be the bad guys in a certain scenario and the them might be the people you need. You could see that played out in what's going on in our own country right now. The Christians might find some allies in non-Christian people. Our government has become so anti-Christ at this point. Generally speaking, the culture, not everybody in the government, but the government in general is anti. Look at what they're doing to the churches right now because of the COVID. It's totally anti-Christ. If they really had good intentions, then they would apply everything equally across the board. But how can it be okay to go to a gym but not to church?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So you can tell their motives are not pure at all, and it's antichrist. And so you might find refuge in other people that are standing up against the government for their own personal reasons that you can join with. They're not even Christians, but they can help you in your cause. And, I'm kind of making up a hypothetical here, but I think you can understand the point. So David apparently sees that this is one of those situations, and he runs to Ickes of Gath. Verse number 11, and the servants of Ickes said unto him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? The enemy knows what's going on in your backyard. There's always eyes and ears everywhere. They know what you're doing. And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Ickes, the king of Gath. So then now these guys, he ran to Ickes, but now Ickes' people are putting the heat on Ickes about David. Right? This is the guy, that has slain to his 10,000s. Right? Are you really going to be okay with David being here? This is what happened with Pilate, Pontius Pilate. Right? The pressure of the people is what caused him to give. He didn't want to crucify Jesus.
Right.
I don't think I need to develop the whole story. I think that's a basic one. I think that's a basic story, but read John 19 if it's not basic to you. Pilate did everything he could to try to get them to let Jesus go. He had him beat first. Like, is this good enough, guys? You think I took care of? Okay, is this good enough to hold the man? He's just a man, right? He's just a guy. He poses no threat. They weren't happy with that. They chose Barabbas. He tried to do that. That didn't work. He sent him to Herod. That didn't work. Herod sent him back. He did everything he could to try to let Jesus go or let him off the hook some way. But the pressure of the people, politically, it was political suicide on Pilate's part, and he decided to save his own behind than to do the right thing, and he had Jesus crucified. And so this is what you see going on here. The potential ally in Ickes, but then the people are speaking up. Now David gets afraid because this is not kind of like how he envisioned it, apparently, him running to Ickes. So David laid up these words in his heart and was sore afraid of Ickes, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them. So then he hatches a plan to act crazy. And he changed his behavior before them and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Then said Ickes unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So basically, Ickes is just like, this guy's crazy, man. He poses no threat whatsoever. I'm not really worried about this guy. Why are you wasting my time with this guy? And so that's kind of the end of that. So then David leaves, chapter 22. So David's little sleight of hand worked, got him out of trouble there. And David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. Adullam's right here. So you see he was at Nob. He fled to Gath. Now he's at the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. So everyone knows he's kind of on the run now, and his family found out about it, and so his family meets him at Adullam. And verse number 2, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So here you have all these kind of like persecuted people. Some of it their own faults. They're in debt. But you've got your downtrodden, and they go to David. Now this is a perfect parallel to Jesus, the son of David, to where if you are a discontented person, or you're in trouble, you're indebted, and I'm not talking about money, and when we're talking about the relationship between a lost man and Christ, it's not about money, but it's about your sin. You're indebted to him, and going to Jesus is probably a good thing. It's not probably a good thing. It is a good thing. It's not only a good thing, it's the right thing. It's the best thing. And so you can draw a parallel there. These are the people that come to David's aid and come to hang out with him. They're like the anti-government people. They're the ones sick of the government and the taxation that they're having, or whatever it is that put them into trouble, and they go running to David. And then if you were to look at, I think you find it interesting, I don't have time to really do it, but if you go to we can look at it. If you go to First Chronicles, so a couple books ahead, First Chronicles, chapter 11. You'll see a list of names of some of these 400 men that come and hang out with David. And you can just scan through, because I'm not going to read them all, because every name's not important, but I'm just going to point out a couple. Like from verse number 15, and you just can see kind of a couple of names there that were up at the top. And you scan on through like the 22. There's Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. He was a valiant man. Some of the things that he did. Verse 26. Also the valiant men of the armies were, and then it starts naming these guys off. 27, 28, 29, 30, so forth. And you get down to 41, and I want you to notice that first name mentioned there. The first word of 41, Uriah the Hittite. Many years later, after David is the king and Saul is already gone, if you want to understand the level of betrayal that David did to Uriah, you have to know this right here. Because Uriah was with David when David was in trouble. Uriah was one of those guys that was with David through every minute of all of the distress that David went through, that he writes about in the Psalms. Uriah was right there with him all along, standing with David through all of this stuff. And this is why you see Uriah refusing to even go home to his wife, because he's serving David still after David's the king many years later, and David betrays that man. That's a hugely deep betrayal, and you can't understand the gravity of that betrayal if you don't put the connection to what, because Uriah wasn't just a guy in David's army at that time with no real close personal relationship. No, he was with David in David's worst of times. He put his life on the line to protect David for the entire time he was on the run. Uriah was one of those dudes around the campfire, singing camp songs, consoling David, hiding David, fighting to protect David, living a miserable life in the woods instead of at home. This was Uriah. This is one of those 400 guys. Okay, so I wanted to bring that up now, because as we're going through the story of David, in the back of your mind, remember Uriah is experiencing all this stuff too, even though his name's not even brought up, in the events. He's just one of the dudes. He's just a dude right now. So I think that's important for you to understand, because boy, does that drive the betrayal home, and boy, it hurts even more. And we're just reading about it, and it's just like a stab. I don't know about how you react to it, but it's just like when I first learned this lesson, it was like Wow. I mean, it's more than just what we usually get in the typical storytelling of the account of David's betrayal of Uriah. Yeah, it was wrong, and yeah, this was another man's wife, and blah, 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 but that wasn't just another dude.
Right.
This was a Hittite. He's not even an Israelite. He puts his life on the line for David all this time, totally loyal through thick and thin, before David had any power whatsoever in government. Uriah was there. That's the guy he betrayed. That's heavy. So there were 400 of these guys with David. In verse number 3, and David went thence to Mizpah of Moab. So now he was in the cave of Adullam, and he comes all the way down below the Dead Sea to Mizpah of Moab over here. That's where he goes. And he said unto the king of Moab, let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And that's a good thing, because he's looking to the Lord to guide his steps. But what is he doing here? He's protecting his elderly parents. His elderly parents came to him at the cave of Adullam. The king was going to go pay a visit to his family down there. And the king's already out of his mind. So there's no doubt Saul likely would have wiped out his entire family. Killed his parents, killed his brothers, their families, their wives, their kids, everything else. They came to David in Adullam, and he's like, man, I can't let my elderly parents hang out in caves in the woods. I gotta figure out how to take care of my elderly parents. That's a lesson. We need to take care of our elderly parents, right, JJ? So it's important that we learn these lessons. David is not just thinking about himself. I mean, you talk about loyalty to his parents. I mean, that's his life is on the line, and he's taking care of them instead of looking to them to take care of him. These are his elderly parents, and I've got to take care of. That's my duty. Even though he was the youngest son, who did his parents go to? Him. And he took them to the king of Moab. A pretty long journey there too. And it says, he says to the king of Moab in verse number 3, let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. The hold is just short for stronghold. His defensive positions. It doesn't really say where it was. It could have been back at the cave of Adullam, but the text is telling us that he got his parents out of danger's way and asked a friend, care for my family, care for my parents. They can't stay with me. It's not, number one, my elderly parents don't need to be living in the woods with a bunch of ragtag soldiers, and they don't need to be in harm's way if Saul finds me. I don't want them with me when battle breaks out. So David's doing a good thing here for his family, still thinking of his family. So then you get to verse number 5, and the prophet Gad said unto David, so now there's this prophet with David. He must be one of those 400 men. I think it's possible Samuel sent this guy, because Samuel was with the prophets. You had that school of the prophets and all that other kind of stuff. So it's likely this guy was sent by Samuel. But again, we have to admit it doesn't say that. But there's this prophet there. Maybe he just showed up walking down this. He was morel mushroom hunting and just happened to show up on the scene. I have no idea. But here he is. So you've got this prophet Gad said unto David, abide not in the hold. Depart and get thee into the land of Judah. Then David departed and came into the forest of Hereth. The forest of Hereth is right here. Wasn't that far. If he was at Adullam, who knows where the stronghold was? I mean, he went to the Mizpah of Moab. It doesn't really say where it was, but nonetheless, he ends up here in the forest of Hereth. So it looks like the prophet realized that whatever this stronghold was, this defensive position that David and his men took, it was probably too obvious where they were, and it was probably better that they have a less well-known place to be. So he tells them to go to the forest of Hereth. So that's where, he tells them to get out of the hold, and they go to the forest of Hereth there. in Judah. And I'd like to start this, but I'm out of time basically. I only got like a minute, so I don't want to start it. But you're going to see here that Saul, his delusions, his evil intentions, his paranoia has got him so screwed up in the head that he thinks everyone's against him. David's not even against him. David never takes an offensive disposition against Saul. It's completely defensive the entire time. All he's trying to do is protect himself from Saul. He never goes on the offensive to attack Saul. But yet Saul gets this in his head and thinks everybody's against him. Jonathan's against him. David's against. None of it's true. And then the priests end up paying a price because of the delusions of Saul and because of the lie of David. And the priests end up getting killed. Maybe if they had some weapons, that might not have happened. Maybe if David hadn't lied, that might not have happened. So there was a confluence of events and circumstances that led to this genocide of the priests. And David's pretty much responsible for that because he lied to someone who was his friend and had no evil intention for him. And we're not to lie to our friends. If they don't have evil intentions, then why would you lie to them? They could be your ally. All David had to say was, man, I'm on the run from Saul. You know, can you feed me? Because it's going to take me a while to find a place to hide and get food. Can you feed me? I'm on the run. Do you have any weapons? I'm totally unarmed, to protect myself. Can you help me out? If Ahimelech would have said no, he would have said no. But, that would have been the right thing to do. At least to protect Ahimelech, because then Ahimelech could say, yeah, I didn't help him. Or, who knows what would have happened now, right? So we'll leave it there. So the story gets really interesting. I want you to remember some of these background players. I thought the map would help you be able to see it in your mind's eye. But remember Doeg, he's going to come into play here. And remember Uriah is one of these 400 guys. And then when we get to that point of the account of David's life, it hits like a ton of bricks because Uriah is there with him the whole way. All right, let's pray. Lord, we're thankful for this opportunity.
But after they crowned him king, he hung out in his hometown of Gibeah. And Gibeah really was the capital of Israel at that time. We don't think of it that way, but there was just a little fort there in Gibeah, and that was more or less where Saul lived. That was the palace.
The king's house.
But now when he becomes king, he's going to conquer the city of Jebus
From Hebrew.
and Jerusalem will become the capital because he's going to take the city of Zion. So it's very interesting to look at all these things. Yes, there's that Gath. Gath originally was a Canaanite city that was destroyed by Joshua. And of course, there's a lot of caves.